Hey guys, Abel here, back with another video, and in today's video I want to talk about band training, building muscle using resistance bands, and I want to talk about this product called the X3 bar, which is the invention of Dr. John Jaquish. He did a podcast recently with my buddy Dave McConey, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this whole video, because he talked to him. He then did a follow-up video with his own thoughts, which caused quite a bit of backlash, so I thought I would make my own video reflecting on the whole thing. So if you're a bit behind on this whole thing, John Jaquish created this product, which is a series of resistance bands. It comes with a bar. You can hook the resistance bands onto the bar. It's a pretty sleek design, so I've seen some tutorials on this. You can really conveniently double the band tension with this bar, or you can single it. It also comes with this plate that you can stand on. You can hook the bands under, so you can do exercises like squats and deadlifts and things like that. And he also has a book called Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. Bit of a provocative title, and the extension of that title would be weightlifting is a waste of time and using this band tension based training is superior. So is that true? Is weightlifting a waste of time and we were all messing up so far because we could have gotten way better results by using a product like this, which relies on band tension exclusively? Let's talk about that a bit. So first of all, I want to start off by talking about resistance bands in general. So we all know what they are. They are elastic pieces of equipment, which when you stretch them out, they will produce more resistance. When you don't stretch them out as much, there will be less resistance. But in general, they are very versatile. You can do all kinds of exercises with them. They're easily portable, highly convenient, really cool stuff. So for example, when you're on vacation and you're in a hotel room and you don't want to go to a local gym, or you don't want to do some body weight, ultra high rep workout in your room, and you have some heavy resistance bands with you, then you can have a complete workout in your room. And if you have some heavy bands, then essentially you can just carry around hundreds of pounds of resistance in a backpack, which is pretty sweet because you cannot do that with dumbbells, right? You won't be putting hundreds of pounds into a suitcase and carry that around. So bands are pretty cool. Now, when I made my video recently on what pieces of gym equipment I recommend you to get when the gym is closed, like now during the pandemic and you have to train at home, I recommended you to get a pull-up bar, adjustable dumbbells, as many weight plates as what you can afford and store, and a suspension device. Bands did not make that list. However, I do think bands can be a nice addition. I consider them more of a bonus, but I absolutely do think that they can have their place. So for example, if you bought the equipment that I recommended, so now at home you can do chin-ups, you can do heavy weighted push-ups, maybe you can even sort out some dumbbell bench presses. In general, you will be able to really effectively target that lengthened and mid-range of every movement. So in the case of heavy weighted push-up, for example, this stretch position and this mid-range of the movement will be really well targeted. But if you really want to target this contracted position of the pecs, for example, which you would do with a cable fly or maybe a pec deck machine, that will be difficult to do just with free weights. So for that, bands can be a really useful tool. So maybe you do your push-ups, and then once you're done with that, you can hook the band up somewhere, and then you can do some pumpy sets for your pecs with that band. The same thing applies for the hamstrings. So if you bought dumbbells and now you can do some RDLs at home, or if you bought a suspension device and you can do some suspended leg curls, again, you will be really effectively able to target the lengthened and the mid-range of the hamstrings, but that contracted position, which you can really nicely target with a good leg curl machine, that will be difficult to target. So again, for that, you can use bands. It's really convenient and it's just a smart thing to do. And in that case, it doesn't even matter that you're only doing partial ranges of motion because you only want to target that kind of peak contraction. And we can say similar things about your quads as well. So if you want to target that teardrop muscle, the vestis medialis, I believe, which you would do with a leg extension, again, bands can be a good option. Now, as good as bands are, they also have their limitations. And those unfortunately come hand in hand with their benefits. Because while bands are generally really good at targeting your muscles in their contracted position, in the bottom of the movement, in their stretched position, they are not so good at targeting them. So for example, when you're doing something like a band chest press, there will be a lot of tension out here near lockout, but as your arms are coming back, there is less and less resistance, and once your elbows come behind your body, there is zero resistance at that point. So the bottom of the movement, that stretched, lengthened position, is way understimulated. I would call that a problem. Now, Dr. Jaquish doesn't agree. And this is something that he emphasizes. He talks about this in the podcasts that he appears on. He also talks about this in his book, that we are so much stronger out here that is just so beneficial to target mainly that and not focus so much on this bottom position where the muscle is lengthened. And it can be especially problematic according to him because that's where the most injuries occur and things like that. So basically the fact that with a band, something like a band chest press, you're in a way mimicking a partial range of motion bench press, according to him, that's not a problem. And that is just wrong. The benefits of full range of motion training, and especially targeting the muscles in their lengthened position effectively, is very well established in exercise science by this point. I know a lot of you follow Dr. Mike Israetel, and he does these exercise tutorials and mistakes to fix in different movements. What is one of the first things he says in every video? That one big mistake people make in basically every movement is not using a full range of motion and not using that stretch under load, which is an independent stimulator of hypertrophy. And it's true, it has been established in science. So the fact that with really heavy banded training, you can only really target the upper portion of the movements really effectively is not a positive thing. That's a net negative. And I'm sure that someone can cherry pick some studies which show that partial range of motion training is superior to full range of motion, but I can promise you I can cherry pick a lot more that show that full range of motion is better. Now, I do have to say that on a few things, I actually agree with Dr. Jaquish. So one thing that he talks about in his book and also on the podcast that he appears on is that full range of motion training and going for that deep stretch is pretty injury risky. That's where generally people hurt their shoulders on the bench press. In the bottom position is where often people hurt their back on the squat. So I agree with him. It comes with more injury risk. But unfortunately, the fact that it comes with higher injury risk does not preclude the claim that it is still better for hypertrophy, okay? Trade-offs like that exist. Something can come with a higher injury risk and also result in better gains. And the easiest example of that is the heavier weights you lift, the stronger you get, the higher your risk of injury, right? In the beginning of your training career, when you're squatting 40 kilos, your injury risk is minimal, right? Many years later, when you're much stronger and you can do reps with 180 kilos, your injury risk is much higher. So at a certain point, if you're chasing maximal gains, you have to make a pact with the devil to some extent. Now, the injury rates in bodybuilding or hypertrophy-oriented strength training are incredibly low. But I do agree that full range of motion training can come with a higher injury risk. So you have to be careful when you're lifting weights and you're using a full range of motion. This is why good technique is so important. This is why ego lifting is so bad, and you have to take care of your joints. So I agree with him, but unfortunately, I still have to say that using a full ROM and going for that deep stretch is a good thing for hypertrophy. Now, with all that said, free weights are also not perfect. Okay, so when you're doing a free weight bench press, it is great in the fact that it uses a full range of motion. You can go all the way down and all the way up, so you're stimulating the whole range of the movement. However, in the bottom portion, and Dr. Jaquish does talk about this, it has a sticking point. Okay, the sticking point in any given movement is the point where you're the weakest. That's where the exercise is the hardest. And if you're going to fail a rep, that's the point where you're going to fail it. This doesn't mean that this is a positive thing for hypertrophy. The sticking point doesn't mean that your muscles are working much harder and you're getting more gains there. It just means that the muscles involved in that exercise are poorly leveraged to produce a lot of force. So down here in the bench press, your triceps are not able to produce a lot of force. Up here, when they are much closer to their natural kind of anatomical position, they can produce a lot of force. That's why if you're going to fail the bench press, it's probably going to be somewhere in this range. Nobody fails it right before lockout. Now, the sticking point means that how much weight and how many reps you can handle will be limited by that sticking point. You're much stronger up here. So maybe you can do 100 kilos on the bench for 10 reps. If you only did this upper portion, probably you could handle a lot more weight or do much more reps. And I actually demonstrated this recently on a video that I uploaded to Instagram. I did some cable overhead presses, but it could have been a dumbbell overhead press or barbell or whatever. And what I did was I did, I think, 7 reps, full range of motion. I was maybe 1 or 2 reps away from failure. And I started doing partial reps at the top, and I could crank out like 5 more reps. Okay, so basically this means that the upper portion of the movement on pressing exercises is understimulated because you could handle a lot more there. So bands or free weights None of them are perfect, both have their limitation. Now, if I had to pick between which one I'm gonna miss out on, am I gonna miss out on the stretch or am I gonna miss out on stimulating the top maximally? I would rather miss out on the top because stretch under load is a really important thing for hypertrophy. And again, this is supported by science. Plus, I mean, yes, the top of the bench press, it's understimulated, but it's not like the resistance there is zero, right? Like you're still handling a lot of load up there. You're gonna understimulate it a bit, but it's not gonna be zero stimulation. Whereas with something like a band chest press, once your elbows are behind your body, the resistance is zero. But in short, both in the case of bands and free weights, there are limitations. Neither of them are perfect. But there are ways to work around these things. So you can use some clever tricks to compensate for these limitations. In the case of bands, what you can do is do drop sets. And this is something that they actually recommend in the case of this X3 training system. So for example, you would be doing a banded bent over row. You go to failure with full reps. So this phase of the movement where it's the hardest, you're going to fail there, and then you're going to do partial reps in that mid-range, and you're going to go to failure there, and then you're going to do like really low reps down there, and you're going to go to failure there. Maybe if there is not enough tension on the band at that point, you can grab it a bit lower down, and you can do reps that way. So you can kind of work around this thing, and you can compensate to some extent. It's a bit annoying, it's a bit hard to standardize, but it is a viable way to do it. Now, on some movements like the banded chest press, you cannot really compensate for this if you're really insistent on just using the band, okay? So once your elbows are back here and there is no tension on that band anymore, you know, gravity goes that way. It's basically just some weird isometric lateral raise variation that you're doing here. So with some movements, you basically cannot compensate at some point. But if you're willing to do something else, so maybe you go to failure on the banded chest press, and then you do some push-ups where you're only targeting this lengthened position, then you can work around these things, okay? Now, in the case of free weights, ironically, one of the best ways to work around these limitations is by using bands. So on the bench press, for example, you can put some bands on the bar, you can overload the top of the movement a bit more, and if you're setting this up properly, you can get to a point where the movement basically has no sticking point because you made it equally difficult throughout the whole range of motion. This is actually called accommodating resistance, and this actually has some pretty good backing in the research as well. Studies which compare accommodated resistance training with just free weight training generally find that using bands and chains or something that makes the whole movement equally difficult is going to be beneficial. So I would expect that bands plus free weights would beat just free weights, and just free weights would beat just bands. Now, so far, that was all kind of just a logical explanation, but what does the science say about this? Because Dr. Jaquish says that studies conclusively show that band tension-based training is far superior to weight training.
This idea that weight, like somehow static weight, provides some sort of magic. Like, well, we know what weights do, and then we see variable resistance outperforming weights in every test. And so it's like, well, you need both. Well, what part of these papers does it say both? Nowhere. It's variable resistance.
So what I actually did was I bought the book because I was curious about all those citations and references. Dave, when he did his follow-up video, he got a ton of shit for this. That, man, the book is full of citations. You should have read those studies. So, okay, I actually bought the book just to check those citations. Now, the book has a pretty limited section which is actually about this topic, that band tension is superior to weight training, okay? So it was a pretty limited section. A lot of the other parts I left alone where it was about nutrition, which I didn't care about in this case. Some citations or claims I didn't have to check for when he said that the bench press has a sticking point. Cool, I agree. People are stronger with a barbell than with dumbbells. Cool, I agree as well. I don't need to check those. But the claims where it was specifically about the idea that resistance band-based training is superior to weight training, I did check for those. So I collected out all these citations. I opened the Google Docs and I copied all the links and I read through them. And what I found was that every single one of these studies were studies where they compared weight training with weight training plus bands. So they were not comparing just resistance bands with weight training. No, they were essentially comparing weight training with accommodating resistance, which I just talked about. And interestingly, they found that using this accommodating resistance principle works. Cool. Now, the book words this pretty cleverly because it doesn't explicitly say that this study examined people using only bands or only weights. It says it compared using variable resistance with constant resistance, I think. So it didn't explicitly lie, but it was also sort of not stating what's really happening here. These studies were comparing weight training protocols, and in some of those groups, they also added bands. Okay, some of them were so nice that they thought of people who maybe can't read, and they even demonstrated it with a picture. You see it there? The guy's deadlifting the bar and with some plates, and there's also a band there, a reverse band actually. So how is that exactly relevant to this claim that using only band tension is better than weight training? 3 times better, in fact? There is no relevance, okay? These studies do not support that claim whatsoever. So guys, if you ever wondered how science can be used to sell people on bullshit ideas, this is exactly how. You put in a whole bunch of references because you know it fully well that 99% of people will never bother to check those references. And those very few people who will, those are probably not your target market anyway. And for what it's worth, I actually did a quick search after this and looked for studies which compared only bands with weight training. And I found one study which seemed like it was well designed, and those found that weight training was better. And then I found a meta-analysis which at least claimed to compare resistance bands with weight training, and that found that they were roughly equal. Now, I think that finding is partly because that meta-analysis is erroneously also included studies which compared weight training with weight training plus bands. I think if they didn't include those studies, then they would have found that weight training is actually better. So there you have it. The claim that band-based training is superior to weight training is just false. And I think that should be pretty obvious if you just understand how this thing works. But if that's not enough, then there you go. The studies also do not support this. Now, I can envision some of you typing comments already which say, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like I've never had such great workouts in my life. I'm working so hard. These workouts are the most challenging in my life. Yeah, I know. I've seen some tutorials on YouTube. I've seen some people reviewing this product. And what I tend to see is people huffing and puffing a lot. They are working really hard. It's clear that they are really exhausted. And it's not a surprise because what they're doing is high rep work with a lot of drop sets, okay? If you're doing that type of training, you're gonna get a lot of fatigue. You're probably also getting a lot of good pumps because you're mainly overloading the muscles in that contracted position, in the case of a bicep curl, for example. There was one guy who commented under Dave's video and said, dude, your comments on the squat are way off, because Dave also mentioned that there is no tension on the squat in the bottom position. And the guy was like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, I had leg workouts with this band where my legs were shaking at the end. Dude, good for you. Your legs were shaking. You can achieve that effect by doing a lot of things which are not great for hypertrophy, okay? Here is an experiment for you. Do a couple of high-intensity sprints on a stationary bike, then walk over to the squat rack and try squatting. Then your legs are gonna be shaking real good, okay? But that doesn't mean that you're getting a better training effect. So this is another problem actually that we have to talk about, that unfortunately another limitation of bands is that the way in which you're making up for the limitation that you're not targeting that stretched position is by doing this drop set. Now that can be great on some movements like a bicep curl or a tricep extension. But when you're trying to do that on things like squats and deadlifts, you're inducing a shit ton of cardiovascular fatigue, which is actually going to be a net negative for optimal muscle stimulation. Okay, and again, this is something that's studied and examined out there. So rest periods, when studies find that longer rest periods are better, those tend to be on compound full body movements like squats, bench presses, overhead presses, things like that. On those, they tend to find that people get better results when they are resting longer. And it's probably because of this. Because when you're not resting for long enough and you're going from one set of squats to the next, you're inducing a shit ton of cardiovascular fatigue, and that will be the limiter instead of the local muscles which you actually want to target, okay? On the other hand, when they find positive effects from things like drop sets, those tend to be on single joint isolation type movements, because on those, it's not a big issue if you're not resting for long enough. Because, I mean, how much are you gonna be fatigued cardiovascularly from something like a bicep curl? Not that much. On the other hand, when you're trying to do drop sets on a squat, you're inducing a shit ton of cardiovascular fatigue, probably by extension of that central fatigue. And that's actually going to induce a inhibitory mechanism in the muscles where they cannot contract and produce a lot of force. And again, this is something that is studied. So there was a study, I think by Schoenfeld, where they did 1 minute rest between squats or 5 minute rest between squats, and the 5 minute rest group actually grew better. So unfortunately, when you're doing this really high rep drop set type workout with something like a squat, maybe by the end of it, you're able to fatigue yourself so much that even just doing bodyweight squats and squatting down to the bottom that way, even that will allow you to train to failure. That probably comes at the expense of inducing so much central fatigue, cardiovascular fatigue, that you're not really able to target your muscles optimally enough. Okay, so that's a problem. Now, I agree that in practice, if you're intent on just using bands or a system like this and nothing else, drop sets and techniques like that are pretty much the best option you have, because that will at least allow you to target that bottom part of the movement somewhat. Okay, so better than nothing. That's a very different proposition than it being optimal or better than weight training. Can you get good results with this? Yes. Just like you can get good results if you eat 30, 40 grams less protein than what you should be eating. You will still build some muscle. You could just build more muscle if you ate as much as you should have. So will you build more muscle with this than with weight training? No. You will most likely build less muscle. Now, that is not to say that I think that this product is useless or it's a waste of money. I don't think that. I think it can be pretty useful in certain instances. So I would say that if you're someone who is currently using the gym and you enjoy going there and you have access to it, everything is good, but you're just having second thoughts because you heard that this builds 3 times more muscle than weight training and weightlifting is a waste of time, don't worry. Keep using the gym. It's your best option. Now, if you're someone who is currently stuck at home in quarantine, your gym is closed, so you have to find a solution at home, then we have a bit of a dilemma here, okay? Because recently I put out the video where I gave my recommendations for the pull-up bar, the adjustable dumbbells, the weight plates, and the suspension device as kind of your core essential shopping list for quarantine workouts. And if you're not lucky with deals, then that could all cost you a couple of $100. Okay, you could get it pretty cheaply if you're lucky, but sometimes you don't get lucky, and it could cost you, $300-400 even. Now, this product is $550, which, by the way, I don't think is a reason to shit on it on its own. What's expensive and what's not is a subjective term, and the price is only a negative if you don't think that you're getting the value that you should be getting out of it. So that's not a problem by itself, but we are talking about comparable price ranges here. If you get all that equipment versus you're getting this. I would say that if you have the space to store all of that stuff, you can put the pull-up bar up somewhere, you enjoy training, and you're interested in the most gains that you can make, then I would recommend that you get the equipment that I recommended. Okay, I would get that before that any day. Now, let's say we are not in quarantine, but you're someone who wants to build muscle, you want to have good workouts, but you're some international businessman.
We are international businessmen. Oh, come on, sir.
Who travels a lot and you're waking up in a different hotel room every other day, okay? You cannot go to the gym because you're super busy. There is no point in investing into a home gym because you're never at home. Then I think this product can be a very decent option. So much so that I might actually recommend it if I had such a client. Because you can carry this around, it fits into your suitcase, and wherever you are, you can have functional workouts in any hotel room. Okay, that's not true of dumbbells and things like that. So in that instance, I think this is way superior to most other things. So X3 bar or weight training, which one is really the waste of time? None of them. None of them are a waste of time or money. You just have to put it in the right context. So there you have it. That's my conclusion on the whole thing. I think this is a decent product if you apply it in the right context. I think it can actually be superior to other things because you can actually use this because it is highly convenient. But will it build you 3 times more muscle than weight training? No. It will build you somewhat less muscle than weight training. If so far you built up your chest by doing bench presses and chest press machines and cable flies, you will get inferior results with this. But for convenience, for a lot of different unique situations, this absolutely has a place. So I have no issues with this product existing. I have 0 issues with this product being on the market. The only thing I have issues with is the way over the fucking top bombastic claims. Okay, that's the only problem here. Now, one last thing I will say is if you want to come in here and give me a ton of shit that I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm ignorant, that's fine. Please do that. You're welcome. But what I would say is you will need a better argument than, quote, you didn't even try the product. Listen, You don't have to have tried something to have an opinion on it, a strong opinion on it, okay? What you need is understanding how this shit works, okay? So imagine if I sold you a product and then a book, which was explaining why that product is better than anything else, and then the product was a bicycle, and then the title of the book was Cores or a Waste of Money. Would you need to buy my bicycle or try it first and read the book to know that that claim is stupid? No, because you know what cars do, you know what bicycles do, so you can form an opinion. And besides that, please don't use the argument that you got good results, because I never claimed that you cannot get good results with this. I'm just saying that you won't be getting better results than what you could in the gym. Okay, that's all there is to it. Other than that, like I said, I think this is a good product, a clever design, pretty sleek, convenient. There's a lot of stuff I do like about it. So I have no issues with it. The only thing I don't like is the claims and some of the way over the top marketing around it. But otherwise, no issues. So that's all I really wanted to say in this video. Let me know what you thought, or maybe I should be careful saying that now. But at any rate, thank you for hanging around up until now, and we will see each other in the next video.